The temperature of the PC case market is about to change. And I don't mean by getting hotter. Find out what we're talking about right here, right now on Robeytech. One of the most popular and best-selling PC cases of all time is the NZXT H510. The NZXT H510 has a solid reputation for being one of the best cases to build in, not necessarily for temperatures. From the cable management routing channels in the back of the case to that iconic cable management bar right there in the front, the NZXT H510 has always had a soft spot in my heart, albeit a hot one. Because for all of the awesome, looking at that closed glass or front panel, you can't wonder how anything in that case is getting any air. But now, NZXT has taken a step that everybody's been asking for and introducing the NZXT H510 Flow. That's right, I said flow, as in airflow. Now, NZXT has listened to their community and has addressed some feedback to introduce this case. They have taken the H510 Elite chassis and created a steel front mesh panel with 5mm perforations to maximize the airflow in the case. One thing we did notice the H510 Flow doesn't have, that both the H510 and H510 Elite do have, is that right side panel and bottom front ventilation. Now, NZXT did hours upon hours of testing in this case, and the reason for this is by opening the front of the case with the mesh front panel, it didn't really help temperatures to have those side perforations. Now, by eliminating the side and bottom vents, they can come in at a competitive price and making the case look and feel more refined. These are their words, not ours. Here at Robeytech, we will be doing our own testing as we do in everything that we review for you guys and girls to see our real world results. We want to let you know what we came up with and how it compares to the test that NZXT has ran. More to come on that later. The NZXT H510 Flow also has an array of features inside and out of it too. Let's start with the front panel. You have a USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A port, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port, and a headset audio jack, along with your power button, of course. Now, what is cool about the H510 series is that NZXT gives you some great accessories, such as like an audio jack splitter for your headset to plug into the front panel, along with a breakout cable for your front panel connectors on your motherboard to arrange them in the way that you may need to. But Robey, that's all fine and dandy. What can we actually put inside of the case? The case itself is made of steel and tempered glass and comes in at 8.11 inches tall, 16.85 inches deep, and 8.26 inches wide, which is just about on par with the H510 or H510 Elite. It also comes with two AER-F 120mm case fans on the front and one in the rear at 120mm as well. For other fan support, you can, however, fit 220mm or 240mm fans in the front, along with AIOs up to 280mm in the front. You could also, if you wanted to, add 120mm AIO or fan in the rear. Remember, much like the H510/H510 Elite, you must remove the bracket up front to install a radiator up to 280mm. Well, we thought until I did it without doing so. Spoiler, you'll find out more about that later. You can also fit one 120mm fan at the top if you like, and you should. Motherboard support for your NZXT H510 Flow is your typical mini ITX, micro ATX, and full-size ATX boards, so you get a lot of choices when you're building your build. You can fit the biggest of the biggest when it comes to GPUs. With 360mm of clearance, you could fit GPUs such as the Asus ROG Strix 3090 or that super beefy CCC thick Gigabyte Aorus Master 3090, which comes in at a whopping 322mm and 4,000 burgers tall. It's so big. Now, of course, you may have to compensate if you put in a 280mm AIO in the front, so be sure to measure the room you have if this is going to be the route that you're taking. So the rear of the case has 7 PCI expansion slots for things like your GPU and other things like Wi-Fi or capture cards. It still has the option to vertically mount a GPU in the H510 Flow, which you shouldn't do because it's super close to glass, but they are still recommending only a 2-slot GPU if you were to do this, or a single-slot GPU. Come on, 1650. By the way, if you are going to vertically mount, you are going to need some additional accessories to go ahead and do that. Full-size ATX power supplies can fit inside the NZXT H510 Flow, much like they did in the H510 and the H510 Elite. And there you have it, a quick overview of what the NZXT H510 Flow is all about and the goodness that comes along with it. But enough about what can go inside, let's actually put some stuff in it. Like PC parts, not like peanut butter. Don't be weird, guys. Given this is the airflow build, we want to make sure that we do an apples-to-apple comparison, because you can see right back there we have an N7, just non-airflow. That's a standard H510. We now have the airflow edition that we're going to be doing here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a lot of the same components that are in that build, so we can do an apples-to-apples comparison between the two builds. So for our CPU, we're using the Intel 10th Gen 10900K. We're using the Z490 Aorus Master. For our RAM, we're using same RAM, little different speed. This one's got RGB. This is the Crucial Ballistics Gaming 3200 megahertz. We're using the Kraken Z63. For our GPU, and again, we want to use the exact same thing that's in the other build. We're using the EVGA RTX 3080. Then of course we care about power, so we're going to be using the NZXT C850 PSU. Finally, just to make sure things look clean and pretty, we're going to be using the Asia Horse cables to make sure that everything looks good. And this is the double CPU kit. This is our build that we're putting inside of the new NZXT H510 Airflow. So, it's got a bunch of holes in the front. Does that actually change the build experience, Robey? Does it? Huh? Tell us! Come on, Robey! Ugh. Well, believe it or not, it actually does. Because unlike the original H510, you can actually remove the front panel and gain access to the front fans, which feels and actually is a whole lot less restrictive. I was actually able to mount the radiator from the front without removing the tray. I'm not saying it was actually easier, don't get me wrong. I mean, I was just being crazy because, you know what, honestly, I just want to test things. But it did make it easier for me to route my cables because you can pop the front and push things through. Now, outside of that, the rest of the build was the same as the old case. To be honest, there is some benefit of NZXT also being an SI, or system integrator, because they ensure the case is not only easy to build in, but also look good with a variety of hardware like they have in like their NZXT BLD systems. When I build in their systems, I can actually see that having the NZXT BLD be part of their business improves the building experience in their cases. And I feel that for their H1, their H510, and the H710 series of cases. And I honestly also believe the H510 airflow feels no different. Are there better experiences building in other cases? Yes. And the physical size of the H510 makes me feel that more than ever. However, given its size, the build experience is good, and there are so many things that just work, and it's like those little things that actually make it pleasurable. Things like being able to slip the motherboard underneath that rear fan, the fact that just the cable routing's in the right places, the distance for USB cables or where things route, or even just the fact that you have a unified plug for the front panel are all just little things that you know make things faster for the builders who build in their stuff for NZXT BLD and make the experience for me as a builder just that much more awesome. Now for what you really want to know, which is, did the airflow actually improve the thermals for the case? We put a bunch of holes in it, did it actually make it cooler? And not just in the build way. Well, to do a test, we used two versions of the NZXT H510. The N7 Special Edition, which is the classic non-tempered glass version of the case, and we used the NZXT H510 Airflow case. Both were using an Intel 10900K cooled by the NZXT Z63 Kraken AIO, and both were using an EVGA RTX 3080 GPU. Though, to be honest, the N7 version was using our specially customized N7 EVGA version, which did absolutely nothing to the overall performance, but man, it looked super cool. Now, it's a true apples and apples comparison between the two cases. We also ensured that both cases had 120mm exhaust fans at the top and the rear for optimal configuration. For exhaust, it's optimal exhaust. It's like Uber exhaust. Anyway, it was the best way to set it up. Okay, so first for thermals. In the H510 flow, we see CPU temps at a nice and cool 25 degrees versus a 10-degree difference of 35 in the normal H510 that was tested under the same circumstances. Good to see an actual noticeable difference there. However, the gap becomes almost non-existent when we stress test the 10900K in the H510 and the H510 flow, getting a temperature of 78 degrees in both circumstances. Now, contrary to popular belief, the H510 is actually a pretty good case with an AIO, and it's not that surprising to see that in both circumstances, the Kraken is doing a good job of cooling both CPUs. Now, what is telling though is some temperatures we don't normally speak about in these reviews, and that's the temperatures of the motherboards. When we see things at idle in the case, it looks similar to idle on our CPUs. There's actually a nice gap, 31 for the H510 Airflow and 36 for the normal H510. However, this is the interesting part. When we turn things up and we stress the machine, which means all of the temps inside, the GPU, the CPU, everything is going up, we see the motherboard temperature of the H510 get to a temperature of 67, while the H510 Airflow only ends up climbing to 44. See, there's the difference. So what we could see, and what was a struggle with previous H510 builds, is a nice air-cooled build in the H510 flow, because this was something we really just couldn't do in the original H510. Cool. Like literally cool. Okay, so what about the GPU temps? They show a similar story to the motherboard. When at idle, the H510 flow is sitting at 35, while the H510 has a single-digit increase of 36. Now, when we stress these two EVGA 3080s though, that's where things get interesting. The H510 sees temperatures when under load of 80 degrees, while we see a 5-degree drop to 75 when using the H510 flow. GPU is getting more air and therefore better cooling. Yes. There is definitely more airflow getting through the case, and both the temps of the motherboard and the temps of our GPU are showing a hefty drop because of it. Okay, so we know the H510 airflow does what it says it's going to do. Get air into the case via flow. But how about the performance of the build we put inside of it? Just because. Let's kick it off with some NVIDIA optimized single player RTX experiences, given this is an Intel 10th Gen 10900K and an EVGA RTX 3080 FTW3. For Tomb Raider, running at 1440p with DLSS on the highest preset, we saw an average frame rate of 163 FPS across the runs that we did in the game. That's great. For Metro Exodus, also running at 1440p, running with ray tracing on high and DLSS set to balance, we saw an average FPS across our runs of 81.62 FPS. That's awesome for a little Metro running in all that RTX DLSS glory. So what about AMD experiences? I mean, these aren't going to be optimal for NVIDIA cards, but we do need to see how those might run on these builds too, right? Well, first up, let's talk about Dirt 5. Running at 1440p with ultra-high graphic settings, we saw an average frame rate of 134.9. That's pretty much nice and buttery for any racing experience there. Lastly, and rounding out the single-player experiences was Borderlands 3. Running at the highest graphical preset, we saw an FPS average of 108.6. That's some quality and smooth claptrap action. So what about the MP games, Robey? Well, for Apex Legends, running on low visual settings at 1440p, optimized for competitive gameplay and high FPS, we saw an average frame rate of 247.3. Finally, for Fortnite, at 1440p, low visual settings, set for competitive, crushing, I do mean crushing, 360 FPS barrier coming in at a nice and fluid 391.8 FPS. Can we say competitive FPS build, anybody? So, there you have it. We do indeed actually have a more well-rounded version of the H510 with the introduction of the NZXT H510 Airflow. There isn't any change beyond the front panel being removable when we think about the build experience in the case, but it will allow for easier access to those front fans, removing both build and cable management frustrations. Thermals are better, especially if you venture outside of the world in AIOs, and your GPU is going to thank you with lower temps thanks to the additional air it can now use to cool itself during those marathon gaming sessions. That being said, I think this is going to be a very popular case, and I have no issues whatsoever giving this case the Robeytech seal of approval. But what did you think though? Are there other things you wish they would have improved on the H510 Airflow? Are you looking to grab one of these cases when they launch today? Would love to know all of this and more down in the comments below. Now while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we either go live or post a new video right here on Robeytech. We really do hope that you enjoyed this awesome episode of Robeytech. Oh, and don't forget, you might enjoy one of these super awesome baseball jackets that we also have by checking out our store down below at robeytechstore.com. Anyway, guys, look forward to seeing you on the next episode.